and hi everyone, thank you for coming. So yeah, my name's Delphine Lievens, and by day I am a box office analyst at a company called Gower Analytics, and I do all sorts of kind of box office analysis and forecasting work there. But the reason this panel came about is because of kind of my more personal interests and kind of personal agenda. So the lovely Grace, who is on our panel, who works at the BFI, actually asked me to do some research earlier this year into films by Black British directors at the box office. And the findings that I had were quite shocking. There's not very many of them being theatrically released. And it led me kind of to question what the barriers are that are preventing Black British films from being released, and more widely, you know, what's preventing British film from being more diverse across the board. So I'm going to hand over to my panelists now to introduce themselves. After that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the just some top line stuff about the research I did about Black British film, and then we'll get into a discussion. So yeah, I'll hand over to my panelists to introduce themselves. So, yeah, Grace, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you for that. I think everyone was just waiting to decide who was gonna go first. Hi everyone. I'm Grace Barber-Plentie. I work in marketing for distribution. Specifically, at the moment, I work for BFI Film Distribution, where I've worked for the last couple of years, working on projects including Mogul Mowgli recently, Bait, among a lot of other re-releases that we've done. And before that, I also worked at Studio Canal and Altitude, and I am also a freelance film programmer and writer, kind of focusing on all of this stuff, looking at Black film and specifically films directed by Black women.
Cool. Aki?
Oh, sorry, I was going to, yes, Aki Omishabi, I guess, well, not I guess, I'm an actor, writer, director. I make movies and act in them and all that kind of stuff.
Great. Hi everyone. I'm Shanida. I am currently the new head of film at BFI Doc Society. At Doc Society, managing the BFI film funds here in the UK. Before Doc Society, I was at BBC Storyville for a long time, and more recently, I was a commissioning editor at The Guardian.
Great, thanks guys. So like I said, I just want to do a quick intro. So basically, the data that I was looking at was part of BFI's Who We Are season, which was run with We Are Parable. Hopefully lots of you guys kind of saw some of the activity around that earlier this year that coincided with the Black Lives Matter movement. So because of that, the data I have at the moment is very much focused on Black British directors. However, obviously, we completely understand and acknowledge there is a need for better representation across all races, classes, genders, sexualities. Really, there's a whole conference worth of discussion, I think, about diversity to be had. So you'll forgive me if my approach seems a little bit narrow. Obviously, it's something that I'm hoping to expand on over time. But yeah, just to get into it, some kind of top line stuff I found when I was researching Black British directors. So I looked at all of the films released theatrically, i.e. in cinemas, with box office recorded by Comscore in the past 10 years. And only 28 films have been released in that time. So that's an average of approximately 3 films a year. Of those 28, Aki's film Reel is one of them. And only 9 of those films made over £1 million at the box office. The highest grossing, as you might suspect, was 12 Years a Slave. Perhaps not something you'd immediately think of as a British film, but basically the criteria I've used at the moment, because you have to find some form of criteria when working with data, is that the director themselves is Black and British. And obviously there's some room to expand. So of those 28 films, they amassed a total box office of 46 million. So that's 28 films, 46 million in 10 years. If we look at all of the films from 2019, over 800 feature films were released in 2019. 130 of those made over £1 million at the box office, and they had a total box office of 1.251 billion. So my initial plan, obviously, was to try and calculate a rough percentage of films made by Black British directors, but it was a completely pointless exercise because basically it represents 0.0000003% or something like that, which I think we can all agree is shocking, and I assume that the results would be similar if we were to look at other minorities as well. Also worth noting that of those 28 films, there's only 3 female directors included in that list. One of them is Amara Sante. The other 2 directors have only released 1 film in the period. And then just some quick stats about population. I apologise for my background noise. I'm out here on the streets of Southeast London. Just going to give that a second to pass. Yeah, sorry, live from Lewisham. So yeah, Black and ethnic minority population in the UK, as per the 2011 census, was 33%. Black and ethnic minority population in London, as per some statistics from 2016, is 44%. And Black and ethnic minorities are in the UK film workforce. There's been a few different studies on this that come out with different percentages. Some are just production, some are distribution, some are both. But yeah, they make up 3 to 5% of the UK film workforce. So obviously there is a huge disparity between the ethnic minority population in this country and how many people actually work in film. So that's just to give everyone a little taster, a little thing to kind of mull on before we get into the kind of main chat. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that I've kind of found when I was doing my research, the main question that was coming to me was, okay, if we have this few films, it can't be that there's not an interest. There is some kind of barrier. And I also think we need to kind of break that down even further. I think we need to be looking at the barriers from a production side, from the distribution side, from the exhibition side, basically accounting for each element of the film value chain. So Aki and Shanida, I'm going to put you guys on the spot and kind of ask you, what barriers do you think you see in terms of these films going into, more diverse films going into production in the first place, getting films funded, getting films acquired by distribution? Shanida, of course, you can, talk to being a funder and a commissioner yourself. So yeah, it'd be really great to kind of hear both of your views on that.
Thanks. I mean, it's really good that obviously we've established that it's a whole chain and there are issues all across the chain. In terms of filmmakers getting into the industry, it's a multitude of issues. Have we just lost Delphine? Perhaps. But from what I can see, certainly it's about...
We have, I think, yeah.
Okay. Shall I continue? Shall we wait? We're back.
Yeah, if I disappear, I'm having some issues at my end. If I disappear, please just keep the show going.
Sure.
It's about what you guys have to say anyway. To keep the peace.
Okay. I mean, so it's a multitude of issues. It's the issues of being able to get into the industry in the first place, having access to commissioners, having access to the industry, not being so, London focused or perceived to be London focused. And so from my perspective as sort of, in this new role at Doc Society and looking after, emerging talent, specifically in terms of the Made of Truth Fund, which is a short film fund, I want to make sure that we can allow our filmmakers actually to have freedom of expression and freedom of voice. I think that's really important, that they can come with not just, unique insights into incredible communities and access into incredible perspectives, but also creative freedom, expression that they can bring to a variety of institutions, variety of commissioners, so that they can make films that speak to the filmmaking talent that they are. So there's that, and I think there's been, to kind of go back further to the industry, as you said, 3 to 5% of the filmmaking work of the film workforce is not good enough. So we need more diverse voices at top level and throughout in a variety of industries. But also in terms of our other funds as well, where we look after, we distribute money for the Features Fund, BFI Features Fund. It's about helping those filmmakers make that leap from being emerging to their first feature film, and then beyond to their second feature film. And that's part of the story that I'm seeing come through in your research, Delphine, as well, is that, people may have one film that they've been able to fund and have made, but it's then sustaining a career in the film industry as well. So that's where I'd like to start. It's a number of, a multitude of issues, and a multitude of talent, institutional staff or beyond, that need to think about this. Aki, you're a filmmaker, so how do you see this?
I guess I see it as, just my opinion, it's a club. It's a little film club that is locked up, and you have to hunt for the keys. And if you find the keys to get into this little club, you're very lucky. In terms of people behind the camera, the diversity behind the camera, I think partly because of the reason in this industry, you mainly get jobs through nepotism if it's behind the camera. It's always, I know someone or know someone so-and-so. And if it starts from, I don't know, say, a general kind of public school, or, less working class people, the nepotism is, go figure, if they're heads of these kind of places, the people they know, like, normally from the same background, how are they going to know someone from the back end of Peckham or Lewisham or something like that? So I think the film industry, a lot of it is nepotism. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Also, in terms of distribution and with directors, just purely on my experience, I feel like there's a lot of talk and hardly any action. I feel like here we celebrate the institutions and whatnot, give more kudos to Black American filmmakers and Black American films than what they do to British Black British filmmakers. Just from my experience, with Reel in the London Film Festival, I was so happy to be a part of it, but it was a fight. And then most of the other filmmakers in that black filmmakers were American. They outweighed the British. Now, when it's the British Film Festival, go figure. What's that about? And that's because we are really not getting a look in. Like with my film, to kind of, I raised the funds privately. I set up a production company to make it. I pretty much did it all myself because no one would give me a look. And even in terms of distribution, I don't have a sales agent. I've never had a sales agent. It's just been me emailing distribution companies saying, watch my film, it's not shit, basically. Trying to do everything just to kind of get looking. And then even with on the exhibition, you know, exhibitors, so forth, not even cinemas, but to hold screenings of these films, they're more interested in the Black American films rather than the British films, the ones that they deem are cool, or the ones that they kind of like have some affiliation to, of this coolness, rather than actually, they say they're nurturing Black British talent, but sometimes I don't think they are, if I'm really honest. They go where the hype is. And sometimes the hype is in this country, but because for some reason, then they're just not shown the same love as what the American counterparts are, which, in my opinion, is slightly skewed. You know, you think of, like, you know, the American films that came out last year to the Black British films. Where's the love go in all these companies? It's not to the Black, you know, for real, for us to get it out there, to kind of hold screenings for these companies to even say they're working with real. It was a fight. And I'm just like, you're saying all this nonsense that you're here champion all this Black talent. I mean, I'm bashing down your door just to say, like, hey, show me some support. Everything you stand for, in a sense of, we shot it in 50K on a budget 50K. We shot it in 2 weeks. We got it in cinemas. I didn't have a sales agent. I didn't. Everything you're meant to stand for, you're meant to support us. But yet we are begging you for your support. It's backwards as far as I'm concerned. Sorry, but that's just my feelings.
Absolutely no need to apologise, Aki. And it's really nice to hear that. And obviously, kind of doing my research, it's really great to just hear these things firsthand, because I am aware of the disparity with US Black filmmakers, and I think it's really interesting that it's kind of becomes a catch-22, because, like you say, you had to make your film yourself on a 50K budget, and arguably if you're in America, you might have been able to secure, you know, a load more funding. You might have been able to secure $1 million in funding if you're in America. Therefore, you come out with a more polished film, a sales agent, and then distribution takes you more seriously, and everything else falls into place. So absolutely get where you're coming from. And I think, yeah, thanks to you and Shanida, you covered loads of really interesting points, which absolutely not going to forget. The stuff about the US, stuff about nepotism, and all sorts of other things, and freedom of expression as well, that you guys covered. We're going to come back to in a little bit, just because I want to hand over to Grace, because I think, Aki, you've kind of fed into what Grace might want to talk about really well. Obviously, Grace has more experience kind of on the distribution and exhibition side of things. And I know personally, just from working in distribution, that if you send a cold email saying, here's my film, I don't have a sales agent, it goes straight in the junk. Whether that's right or not remains to be seen. But yeah, Grace, it would be really great if you could speak to kind of your own personal experience about kind of barriers you might have witnessed, and also maybe a little bit about how marketeers kind of have a responsibility to help films reach the right audience.
Yeah, definitely. I am, in terms of sort of working and experiencing Black films, to use that label, I interestingly started out in distribution working on 2 titles by Black directors, although neither of them were Black British films. So I started out working on Moonlight and I'm Not Your Negro, alongside yourself, Delphine. And I think having that start and seeing how these films can reach a vast audience is really interesting. Then comparing that to not necessarily films that I've worked on myself, but just witnessing other films like struggling to break out in the last few years, and where I personally, working in marketing, see the issue lying is people treating Black people, people of colour, diverse audiences as not being main cinema going audiences. I think this is like a real problem, and I really think it lies at the root of a lot of issues. It's kind of like there's this kind of assumption there's this main cinema going audience. They're the people that we don't necessarily need to market to because we know they're going to come to the cinema regardless. And then it's always like this extra work and consideration needs to be put in. How are we attracting Black audiences to this film? Where are we finding them? Where are we reaching them? When really, I think it's actually using more kind of synergy in terms of marketing to actually be like, no, they are Black people go to the cinema. Everyone I know goes to the cinema or watches films in some way. And obviously, you know, in the last couple of months, maybe the last few years, with the way that Netflix is working and streaming platforms, there probably is a tendency to focus on streaming more. But regardless, I think people of colour are going to the cinema. It's just that when these films come along, they're pushed towards us, whether that's for good or bad. And I think even sometimes with films that maybe aren't Black directed and aren't, you know, starring any Black talent, it's kind of like they're one thing over here, but we're being steered towards these other films. I've lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry, but I do think that's something that really needs to be worked on. And I just think that would be an interesting part of research to look specifically at Black cinema going audiences, because it's kind of like this magical, it's in the same way. And I think there's a session on this later, that obviously like young people are such a desirable audience. And I don't even know what it looks like trying to reach like young Black people. I just think there's potentially work to do on how we're targeting people. And I think it's not quite there yet. Anyway, I'm sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but that's something that's kind of on my mind.
No, not at all. And I think that's really interesting, because there's kind of this issue now of like, when people are excluded, we perhaps need to practice positive discrimination in order to make audiences, you know, clearly ethnic minority and Black audiences must feel excluded from some cinema spaces, maybe art house cinema spaces, because they're not going as much. So you need to need to practice some form of positive discrimination to look at, you know, getting people in through the doors. But by the same token, that it also begs the question, you know, why are we dividing our marketing efforts by race? And at the end of the day, you know, I'm not saying I speak for every Black person, but you were like just as likely to find me and Grace sat in the BFI watching, you know, a Hitchcock film, as you are to find us down Peck and Plex watching Get Out. So people don't always conform to expectations, you know, and I think there's like, I don't envy anyone who works in marketing, because I think that is a big question of kind of how do you be inclusive but not exclusive at the same time, which I think
Can I
go ahead. Sorry.
One other thing.
Yeah.
I also think it's about, especially Black audiences in the UK, what type of films people get behind. Because, sorry, not to compare to the US, but they can have, you know, diverse stories within the Black community, whether it's horror, romance, or whether it's a hood story. In the UK, it doesn't happen. And it takes a lot to kind of, for us to try and tell these diverse stories for a long time. I mean, there were, you know, we say hood stories or whatever you want to call them, which are great. People live those lives to tell those stories, but we've also lived all these, you know, different lives. So I feel we need to get behind all these other stories, even from a distribution point of view, because sometimes I don't think distributors will get behind like sometimes a Black British love story. They may do now, but over the years, when you look at the films that have been released in the UK, sometimes they've always had to be done by some sort of injustice. Maybe it was slavery, police brutality, or hood, or something like that. There's always something to do with being Black, rather than sometimes just stories of Black people living their lives. There always has to be some sort of angle on it. And I feel if we push the amount we put behind those films, we need to, you know, put it behind films that are completely different to that. And I don't feel that gets done here.
I think you're right. And I think this is what I was getting at. And when raising the idea of, you know, freedom of creative expression, that you shouldn't just have to tell a story about, you know, growing up in you know, South London or wherever, or, you know, riots or whatever the issue is. And it's been a real problem, actually, in terms of allowing people of colour, Black people, to have real freedom and creative freedom at that, of the types of stories they tell. And I also think you are right that there is much more of a diverse set of storytelling that you can see coming through in the United States. So, you know, there's plenty to talk about there as to why that might be happening.
I also think it's really interesting thinking about Black British filmmaking and storytelling over the years. If we look back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, actually there was this moment with Black British film collectives like Sankofa and the Black Audio Film Collective, where Black people, not only were they able to tell their stories, they were actually being funded by organisations like the BFI and like Channel 4 to be really experimental, to be expressive, to tell our stories, and to not, Aki, as you mentioned, for them not necessarily to be rooted in some kind of historical events. I mean, I think these issues were still being discussed and discovered, but they were just done in this really expressive, creative way. And it seems kind of post-90s, maybe that tradition, not necessarily saying that, you know, we need to bring back filmmaking collectives, although I think that would be interesting. But I think part of it is the funding. And, you know, these organizations were assembling these filmmakers and they were saying, have this money, go out and make what you want. Whereas now, I think it's kind of, things have shifted, and now it's more the filmmakers will approach the funders. And it's almost, you know, not knowing much about funding, and Shanida, maybe you can talk more to this, but it's almost like there's this invisible checklist. And if there's some kind of historical element, that's most likely a tick. If there's some kind of trauma or suffering, that's probably, you know, some kind of tick, and that's more likely to appeal to audiences rather than, you know, funders, distributors, exhibitors taking a chance and just kind of accepting that these are these pieces of art that are just going to attract an audience and are just a lot more free in terms of what the filmmakers are trying to say.
Well, I think, you know, from my perspective right now, as somebody who's kind of managing a slate of funds that, you know, enable grantees to get their films made, I think there's no such thing as a checklist, but there is obviously serious discussion around films that will be able to complete their funding. We are not the sole funders in any of our titles, pretty much. So it's about films that can raise additional funding. It's the same with the Storyvilles I was commissioning and working on. It was the same with the Guardian titles as well. It's that they have to be able to raise their additional funding if that is something they're seeking on the international market. And then, you know, there are discussions about, you know, power and the dynamics of money and representation certainly to be had there. But it's that ongoing struggle between films that will be able to actually be made and be seen by audiences. And at that point, it's a round table discussion. You're talking with distributors, you're talking with co-funders, you're talking with other platforms, and they all bring to the table their own sets of criteria and audiences. And I think there's something we also need to talk about, which is freedom from the universal audience. And I think it's really important what you were just talking about, Grace, around the collectives of the 70s and 80s, which is they were also given freedom from a specific audience in mind, or this universal audience, which can be a trap for a lot of filmmaking talent and television talent, especially. I mean, there. So, yeah.
I think, honestly, you guys don't even need me here to moderate the panel because you've covered so many of the points and questions that I was going to lead into. But I had sort of had a look through, and it's really interesting what you guys were saying. There's two themes coming out here: hood stories and history. And if you look at the list of films I had, the 28 films I mentioned earlier, going from top to bottom, we've got 12 Years a Slave, Blue Story, Brotherhood, A United Kingdom, Belle, and it takes all the way down to kind of Submarine and Yardie, which both did over 1 million actually, which is kind of crazy. But you've got to bear in mind they're, you know, two directors that were known for other things, kind of already had a platform. And, you know, it takes that far down to get to something that's a bit different. And I think, yeah, it's really interesting, this kind of idea that, you know, there's tick boxes. I don't think that, like Shanida says, I don't think there are invisible tick boxes, but based on my own experience, obviously I work in quite a commercial environment. I work as a box office analyst. I've worked in distribution, and perhaps the system we use is broken. And I think that's something that's been discussed a lot this year, as kind of the idea of theatrical is changing and evolving, because we rely so heavily on box office as an indicator of success. And sometimes that's not necessarily the case. You know, lots of films do well elsewhere. And we've had a question actually from someone in the audience about His House on Netflix, which I think is really interesting, because that's maybe the first time Remy Weeks' His House, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is a Black British director making a horror film. And I do think that kind of streamers are allowing for kind of a bit more diverse filmmaking, or even the BBC with the Small Axe anthology. So 2 questions for kind of everyone to consider and respond to is, why do you think we're not getting the chance to see films like His House in cinema spaces? And what are the US doing perhaps that is making their films cut through more than ours? And do you think there's any lessons we can take from the US in terms of how they support Black filmmakers over there?
What I would say is the US they're willing to take risks. They believe in discovery. I use this analogy. I know an actress out in the US, and you know, Black actress nominated for all these awards over the last year or so. British. She said when she was in here, they noticed her talent, but she was kind of like a bird in a cage, and they're just like, you're there, you're fine, you're talented, cool. She said when she moved over to the US, it was the same thing. She did exactly the same thing, exactly the same show, noticed their talent, but she said the difference is they opened the door on the little cage and let me fly. That's the difference, and I can even tell from my experiences from, you know, since Making Real, the opportunities that I've had in the UK to the ones that reach my agent from the US, they're just completely different. They're more trusting in the US, where in the UK you have to kind of prove yourself time and time and time and time again. And I appreciate you know, Small Axe, but I mean, that's Steve McQueen. He could make a film wherever in the world. It'd be interesting if it wasn't him and someone else took those to the BBC. I mean, that might have taken some time to kind of make or persuade it. That's just my opinion, but maybe not. But I mean, you know, it's Steve McQueen. So, and they're fantastic films. In His House, a horror film, again, with Remy, like you said, streamer, Netflix, they're willing to take that risk even more so. And I think the BBC might be involved in that as well. So there's change coming, but I just know we kind of have to jump through a lot more hoops and to prove ourselves. You know, there's many films out there that are not successful in the box office and have huge budgets from our counterparts and fail every year, time and time again, from directors. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know what it is.
No, and I think, yeah, they're all really good points. And I don't know what the answer is, because I feel that, you know, distribution if they can, you know, yeah, like you say, release the next Michael Bay flop, why can't they take a chance for a tenth of the budget on something like His House? And it is really interesting. And I do think that there's a lot of questions this year around, you know, the strength of theatrical and whether theatrical distribution exhibition is too traditional and it needs to shake itself up to kind of be able to face the future challenges. Because, yeah, the independents as well, very well positioned to pivot themselves into this crisis. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. I kind of wanted to move on to something else that's quite a key point that we touched on, just to make sure it gets covered, which was talking about diversity in the workforce. So as I mentioned, only 3 to 5% of the British film workforce are from ethnic minority backgrounds. We all agree it needs to be more diverse. It's kind of a two-part question. The first one is, do we think that now is the time for more radical action? And is what we've been doing so far too tokenistic? Bear in mind, I entered the industry through an amazing scheme back in 2015, so that's 5 years ago now, which was aiming to increase diversity in the industry, but it still feels very piecemeal. There were only, I think, 14 of us on that scheme. And I think what I have learned from that scheme and looking where people have kind of gone afterwards is that retention is really an issue as well. If you can't see people like you around you in your industry, it makes it even harder to stay put, I think. Not to mention issues of kind of discrimination or bullying or anything else that might happen. So yeah, I'd love to hear kind of thoughts from you guys on, do we need to be more radical, and do we need to be looking at retainment more? What can, you know, and what can we do about that?
I think yes. Basically, I just think coming into workforce and just seeing diversity at every level encourages junior people to stay in that workforce. They can see themselves higher up. You know, say I was to join Doctor Society and I saw Shanida there, I would be like, okay, this is something to aspire to. This is someone whose level I can one day be on. And obviously, you know, that's not to say that it's not possible for us to identify with other people in our workforce, but I just think there's intersectionality and there's, you know, there's problems and issues and strengths as well that we can share. And I just think we have to see ourselves at every level. And I also like to think as well that there's going to be less of these issues of diversity and how are we getting these films made and how are we getting these films in if there's people everywhere that have these ideas in mind. And to be honest, they don't necessarily need to be Black. I think it's an advantage if these people are diverse, but just having people at these levels that just want to change things and want this diversity, I think it's going to come easier. It's going to all feel more organic. It's going to make the film industry feel different. And yeah, I think it just sort of needs to happen now. I think it's an interesting time. It's a strange time. I think not necessarily a lot of promises, but a lot of kind of things were said during the summer about things needing to change throughout the UK, throughout various workforces, throughout the film industry. And a few months on, I'm not sure that those promises have been met. And I think, you know, how do we hold the film industry accountable to this change that they promised during the resurgence of Black Lives Matter? And yeah, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there? I think in every single section, every part of the industry should be thinking about the power they hold and how to redistribute that power, full stop. And that means looking at leadership and beyond all the way through. I sort of think that is really where the conversation should be. And this is very much a personal thing, but I sort of didn't want to have conversations within the industry unless that was where they were coming from, which is just, you know, we've thought about our power and where it's held and who has it and who should have it and who doesn't have it currently. But then it's also, what I worry about is then is the picture, right? It's picture changing of the leadership on their screens, and so, you know, it doesn't all look white or what have you. But then it's about making sure that everyone has a voice. It's all well and good having a diverse workforce if very few people or none of those people have a voice in that workforce. And it's absolutely what you touched upon, Grace. It then allows things like creativity to fly, expression, ideas to take root, and it creates those pathways toward leadership, I think, because you're allowed to be elastic and pivot around ideas and find connections and build collaborations. And that's what we should be doing when we're talking about filmmaking, especially my part of filmmaking, which is documentary filmmaking. It has to be collegiate as we think about the bigger ideas of the day, and it has to absolutely represent. We are documentary image making is representing the real world, so it's something I think about constantly, and I know at Doc Society we think about constantly also.
I think with diversity in a workplace, listen, I don't get why it's even a discussion. It blows my mind from 2 points. Analogy. At one point, I worked in the city, and if you're, you know, looking after clients' money, and you're investing it for them, I'm not just going to put 100%, say, in one company. It just doesn't make sense. You diversify the portfolio. So if you want growth, you spread it out to get the best back. And it's the same as, you know, if one pub was just selling one type of beer and that's the only beer that pub sold, and the next pub next door had 5 different beers, what pub's going to be busier? It's as simple as that. And it's the same as in the workplace. It's the same as in film. It's the same. Diversity helps a company in terms of creativity, in terms of moving forward, in terms of thought. And I guarantee you it will help if you're a businessman, if you're a savvy businessman, it will help you financially as well. It's a no-brainer. I really don't. I just don't get it. It's a no-brainer. I really struggle to understand it when people are like, oh, you know, we need to improve it. It should be from the get-go. When you actually think about it, it should be from the get-go. It would just, and the other thing I'd like to say is just in terms of, you know, in the workplace, I feel even if like we're all in different companies, we need to somehow collaborate more and bring together more things between us, and not always. I feel sometimes, I'll be honest, when I was making my film, when I was trying to look for a diverse cast, because I was nobody as a director at the time, I struggled to find sometimes a diverse cast, and I was just like, what's that about? It shouldn't, do you know what I mean? Don't wait to be chosen. I feel like if we start a little cool thing ourselves or what have you, then people want to be a part of that. Do you know what I mean? Don't always go to, I'm not explaining myself great, but I just think collaboration is key. And even if we're all at different companies, to kind of come together and help each other and support each other when people, you know, are doing stuff. I mean, some people nowadays support celebrities rather than their friends. A friend's just done an album, but they buy Beyonce's, but won't buy their friends. It's madness. Like, support your friends, support people around you. And like, I think that's the key to it. And then we all rise together, to be honest with you.
So especially in the documentary world, something I've noticed, I mean, if we're talking about sort of the differences between the US and the UK, I mean, in documentary in the US, there are such amazing support networks, such as Black Girls Doc Collective. There's Undocumented Filmmakers Collective. There's so many support networks for people of color and Black people who are making and in the US, and they are here, they are emerging in the UK, they are dotted around the UK. But I totally agree with you. We need to really build bridges and work collectively.
I really agree with both of those points, and I do think it is important. But my one worry, and I don't think this is a worry for us, I think we absolutely should be doing these things, but I do worry that it essentially allows people that aren't in those groups to be complacent. They can see that we're forming these coalitions, these collectives, and they're like, okay, that's ticking the diversity box. And sometimes I do worry. I don't know if there's an answer, but it is definitely something on my mind.
There's no answer, and I think, like you say, Grace, it's not our problem to solve.
Yeah,
but it's really interesting that that you said that, because I think that I've been saying to a lot of people recently that diversity feels like a grassroots organisation, and it's we're now a grassroots group within film that are having to bind together just to get our voice heard. And absolutely, we should be challenging the complacency of others, and that's what I kind of hope that panels like this will be a starting place for. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to just broach something that was an audience question that I thought might actually bring like a nice positive note to this. I think it's been a really good conversation, and we've touched on like so many really good things. But I just thought, it was an interesting question that I wanted to share. And then, so maybe we can talk about that. And if anyone else has got any kind of burning desires to share things they felt they've not had a moment to share yet, then we've got 10 minutes. So, well, actually more like 8 minutes now. So someone was talking about distributors and exhibitors' marketing efforts, and said, can you think of any good initiatives or campaigns you have seen reaching a young Black audience? Which I thought was an interesting question, because I think we do need to, like you're saying about making collaborations, connections, we need to big up people who are already doing the work as well. So if anyone, I don't know, Grace, if you want to talk a bit about working with We Are Parable or anything like that, be interested to hear. And any other burning points you've got to share, please go ahead.
I'm always happy to big up We Are Parable. I think the work that they do is excellent. And they have, I think it's amazing the way they've really developed a core audience. I'm actually more interested to see the kind of things they're going to be doing in the future as their own entity. I know they've worked closely kind of helping on grassroots marketing for a lot of films, but I just think with their campaign momentum they're doing at the moment, I think it's so exciting and so needed to actually be looking after people in the film industry, and be collaborating in that way, I think is so interesting. I'm not sure how this actually did at the box office, and this is a US example, but I do actually think the marketing around Queen and Slim this year? Was it this year?
So?
I don't even
believe it or not, yes.
I mean,
pandemic,
that to me is wild, but I do think that was targeting. I think that film managed to target a Black audience without, it kind of did that really difficult balancing act that I was trying to get at earlier. It targeted a Black audience, but never in a way of saying, we're targeting you now, and because there's a Black film, we finally want you to feel included. It was saying, this is a film with a Black cast, it's a film with a Black writer, a Black director. But at the same time, I think because, there are obviously big names behind the camera in terms of the writers, director, and in terms of the stars, it did, and also I suppose the genre of the film, it did appeal to a wider audience. And I think it kind of, the marketing campaign for that really, it walked that fine line of feeling like everyone was included. And I also don't think it tried to say that it was telling a universal story.
I think parts, just my opinion, some of that was because of the culture of the film, and everyone loves Black culture.
Okay, that's a really interesting point.
And that sort of, I just think everyone loves Black culture, and that was the selling point of that film. You can even tell from some of the shots, the trailer, the clothes, the fashion, the music. I think that's what kind of, it was a style, it was stylistic, and everyone wants to feel like they're cool. And I think that's what garnered like a huge audience to that film.
That's really interesting as well, because it kind of is touching on a lot of the points. Oh, sorry, Delphine.
I was just going to say it's interesting that there's an interesting discussion to be had, probably not in the next 4 minutes, about having to make black films a commodity, which kind of goes back to what we were saying about hood films and historic films. It's like, even if it's not those things, then it's like, how are we selling our blackness as a commodity to get audiences through the door?
This is
go on,
exactly
Grace.
what I was going to say. You've honestly just led me down the path nicely. Is that it's really interesting, Aki, that you think it is the style that sold the film, considering it is a social issue film at the end of the day, and it is dealing with some really tough things. I mean, I now feel like I am a Queen and Slim advocate, and I should say I really don't like the film, but that's by the by. But I think that's really interesting, and that's quite a clever way of marketing a film, for good or bad, is by saying, look at these cool young actors, and then you go in and you're seeing a film that's dealing with the effects of police brutality. I think that's pretty clever.
And it didn't lead with police brutality, did it?
No.
I also want to big up We Are Parable, just because I love what they're doing, and I loved their takeover of all of the BFI channels over the summer, because it forced a taking stock of and a real engaging with our canon. That actually we do have canon. There are filmmakers that have legacy, Ngozi Onoram and Alicia Baz, John Comfort as well. But then it also pushed forward and threw forward to that kind of what's happening now, but also the current state of affairs and where we might move to in Black British filmmaking, and throwing forward to those new names. And they took over all of the channels, and I thought it was a real great way to sort of say, no longer is it a niche audience thing. It's a real kind of throwing the doors open and saying, this is who we are, this is who we were, and this is where we're going. And I think more of that needs to happen. And it felt really invigorating over the summer to engage in that.
I would I'd agree. We Are Parable. I think the guys are great. I also think, the British Blacklist as well, the Black Connective. But again, what I think needs to happen sometimes with those organisations is this discussion we've had about distribution and stuff like that. I think we know it's hard for black films to get distribution. So sometimes I think maybe not those organisations, but an organisation needs to set up and kind of seek out black films that are struggling to get distribution and immerse their audiences with them. Not just all these big films, and I know a lot of it comes down to budget and funding and all that kind of stuff, but something needs to be done about, championing black British filmmakers as much as their American counterparts, where, like you said, they were doing things, films that, not old black British filmmakers, but, throughout some of the array of films they had, but also the up and coming ones that are finding it hard to get distribution, or are finding it hard, because I know for a lot of them, like the directors in the UK, the ones that I know, they're just kind of treading water, looking for someone to kind of help them. And I know it's a lot about funding, but I feel like even if it's just the odd occasion, dedicate a week to kind of these black filmmakers that are struggling to get their voices seen or struggling to get distribution. Engage with your audience, show them. You never know what can come from it. Discover.
I mean, I think that's a really good point, Aki, and a nice point to kind of draw this to a close as well. I totally agree with you. There needs to be a refocus of attention, a refocus of where some of the money is going. The reason that organizations have to work with, you know, the bigger US films a lot of time is because the distributor has got the budget to pay them.
Yeah.
And they need. So, you know, there is an issue there about, you know, where is perhaps some of our public funding going? There's a lot of ideas to unpack there. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to say thank you to Grace, Shanida, Aki, who've all brought, I think, some really incredible, interesting insights, first-hand experiences, and have kind of stepped up with me and been brave enough to kind of call some things out as well, which I really appreciate because I know it's not easy to do. Do you guys have any like really quick parting comments? Or I just want to say like thanks so much to everyone who came along as well. I think this is a conversation that is going to have to carry on, and we're going to keep carrying the flaming torch or whatever. And I think there's a discussion group after this, so I'm going to try and drop into that for 5-10 minutes to say hi as well. But yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been enjoyable.
Great, I'm really glad. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.